All right, let's get right into it. The US and the Kurds in Syria. Was their partnership to fight ISIS a lasting alliance, or was it more of a temporary marriage of convenience? This question is really at the heart of a huge debate, a debate about betrayal and cold, hard politics. So today, we're going to deconstruct this whole controversy, one of the most complicated and honestly consequential partnerships America has been involved in recently. So where do we start? Well, let's begin with the central accusation, the one that has been all over the headlines and has really dominated policy discussions ever since that Kurdish-run autonomous zone in northeast Syria collapsed. And this is the big question, right? A question that you hear from all sides of the political spectrum. As Syrian government forces started moving in, taking apart the governing structures the Kurds had worked so hard to build, a lot of people turned their eyes to Washington and asked, wait a minute, did the US just abandon its single most effective partner in the fight against ISIS? You know, this feeling of abandonment, it wasn't just a quiet sentiment. No, it exploded into a really powerful narrative. The claim you heard everywhere was that the US had flat out betrayed the very fighters who were so crucial on the ground. It fueled all these accusations that Washington basically used the Kurds and then just discarded them when the job was done. But okay, hold on. There's another side to this story. A key US diplomat, someone who was right in the middle of shaping this policy, offers let's say, a very different, much more pragmatic take on what was actually promised. And that person is James Jeffrey. He was the US Special Representative for Syria, basically the guy in charge of this policy. And he argues that this whole betrayal narrative, it completely misunderstands what the alliance was all about. He insists that US officials were crystal clear from day one about the very specific and very limited scope of the partnership. And this quote right here, this is where the official US position really reframes the entire partnership. According to Jeffrey, this was never ever about nation building. It wasn't an open-ended security guarantee. It was a military arrangement with one single goal: defeat ISIS. Those two words, temporary and tactical, are absolutely crucial. They mean there was always an endpoint, one that was tied to the mission, not some kind of permanent political promise. So if you boil it down, Jeffrey's main point is this: the mission had a clear finish line. The alliance was never a blank check. And he doesn't just pull this out of thin air. He grounds it in official US policy and international law, specifically UN Resolution 2254. Now that resolution is the big one. It's the internationally agreed upon framework for peace in Syria, and it calls for a unified Syria. So from his perspective, backing a permanent, separate Kurdish state it was never on the table. Okay, so if that's the US position, how does that translate into an actual vision for Syria's future? You know, a vision that tries to balance what the Kurds want with the reality of a sovereign Syrian state. And this chart does a great job of laying out the two competing models. On one side, you've got Jeffrey's proposal. Power gets pushed down to the provinces, Kurdish forces become part of the national army, and local folks handle their own security. But on the other side, you have the model he's completely against: a formal Kurdish region defined by ethnicity with its own separate army, kind of like what we see in Iraqi Kurdistan. So the goal here is a really delicate balancing act. It's like trying to thread an incredibly fine needle. How do you satisfy the Kurds' desire for self-governance while also respecting Syria's existing borders? It's a super pragmatic attempt to find that sweet spot, that middle ground between a totally centralized state and just breaking the country apart. And what's really interesting here is that this blueprint, it's not totally new. It actually shares a lot of its basic structure, what some have called its political geometry, with a proposal that came out even earlier, from a totally different source. Yeah, this earlier idea came from a publication called News About Turkey, and they were arguing for the same thing: a countrywide administrative solution, not an ethnic carve-out. So both of these models see the path forward not by drawing new lines on a map, but by totally redesigning how power flows from the central government down to the local level. And this phrase right here, decentralization without division, that really captures the whole philosophy. The idea is to empower local communities, whether they're Kurdish, Druze, or anyone else, to manage their own stuff, their schools, their services, local security, all while staying part of a single, unified Syrian state. And get this model isn't just some academic theory. It's actually based on a real-world example from Turkey. They passed a law number 6360, that created these powerful metropolitan governments in their bigger provinces.
So the idea is to apply a similar kind of administrative fix to Syria. You're devolving power based on practical things like population size and geography, instead of drawing these really divisive ethnic lines.
But, of course, a blueprint for peace on paper is one thing. The real question is, can a plan like this actually work in what is, let's be honest, one of the most complex and volatile political environments on the entire planet? And this table really just sums up the fundamental struggle for Syria's future. It's basically a three-way tug of war. On one side, you've got the Kurdish maximalists, and they're pushing for a formal autonomous region. Then on the other side, you've got the Syrian centralists in Damascus, who want to go right back to a fully centralized state. And then, smack in the middle, you have this decentralization model, just trying to find some kind of workable compromise. At the end of the day, even the most perfectly crafted plan is going to face just immense political hurdles. I mean, you've got regional powers like Turkey that are super wary of any language that even hints at autonomy. The Syrian government and its allies, they want a total monopoly on military power. And maybe the biggest hurdle of all, years and years of brutal conflict have created this incredibly deep well of mistrust that makes any solution on paper just really, really hard to actually put into practice. And so that leaves us with the big, critical question for Syria's future. You know, a logical plan for peace might exist on paper, but can it actually survive the harsh realities of power, of politics, of deep historical grievances? That's far from certain, and it brings us right back to where we started. Was the U.S. promise always limited, or was it a promise that was broken? The answer to that question, whatever it is, continues to shape the future for millions of people who are caught right in the middle of it all.